While Michiganders at first thought the Upper Peninsula was a wasteland, history has borne out the UP to be loaded with natural resources and natural beauty. It didn't take long for mineral extraction to begin, and the forestry industry was likewise quick to make profit off the bountiful woodlands. While both industries are decades off their zenith, the remaining operations are still the lifeblood of the economy for the Upper Peninsula. A Negaunee staple since 1963, the Empire Mine has employed countless people over the years, providing good jobs with steady wages, that is until the plant churned out its last viceroy flux pellet for the steel mills of Indiana on August 4th, 2016. In this edition of Pure Michigan Trains, we'll follow some of the last iron ore trains to call it Empire, the CN or Jenny trains of U-741 and U-743, which ceased to operate in October of 2016. This is Empire's Last Stand, an edition of Pure Michigan Trains presented by the Thornapple River Rail Series. The journey for U-741 and U-743, the identical iron ore Jenny trains, begins on the north side of Escanaba at the Wells ore yard. Off to the left is the yard lead in U-743, building one of the last empty trains to make the run north to Empire. In the meantime, another iron ore train, the U-745, is coming around the Y from Gladstone, with their trip on the Marquette Range subdivision already underway. When the Empire ore trains were still running, CN utilized fleeting by radio blocking to get trains over the road efficiently without needing to use the sidings in dark territory. By calling the trains, which all turned back to Escanaba at the same time, there would normally not be any need to use the sidings. Therefore, the evening generally saw U-745 departing just ahead of U-743, with the first out train calling the dispatcher periodically to report clear of a milepost, which was then used to extend the second train's operating authority ahead. The end result was non-stop running for both trains as they worked their way to the Marquette Iron Range. With the U-745 on their way, U-743 copied their initial track authority and creeped up to the Y switch. The conductor hops off to realign the switch back for the yard lead and signals his engineer the highball. With that, 100 empty ore jennies were off to one of the final trips to Empire. By milepost 124, about 7 miles north of Wells, engineers were able to open up the throttle and attain track speed, which is 40 miles an hour throughout the Escanaba to Partridge segment of the subdivision. The train finds a few peaks of low afternoon sun through the trees, and the wild racket of the empty jennies is unmistakable once the head end passes by. Between Brampton and Perkins, the line loses sight of parallel highway M35 for a few moments, yielding to one agrarian scene on an otherwise forested railroad. At Beaver, M35 rejoins the railroad for an uninterrupted 26-mile-long straightaway, which will take the train all the way to Little Lake. While the line doesn't have any truly trying grades, it has its fair share of undulations, such as the small humps at the hamlet of Rock at milepost 138. From a different angle, we can see that the town even has its own flashing traffic light, which is about as sophisticated as traffic lights come in this rural area. Ten miles up the road at milepost 148, M35 swings wide to meet the tracks at a reasonable angle for a crossing. This is definitely one of those places where train crews approach a bit unsettled, with highway drivers not always giving full credence to the flashing lights, despite the train barreling towards the intersection. Little Lake was, believe it or not, once a junction with the Munising branch of the Lake Superior and Ishpeming Railroad. Today that line is long gone, and the iron ore jetties are led by an Illinois Central SD-70, still adorned in the classic Death Star paint scheme. Near the former Air Force Base at K.I. Sawyer, two highway bridges provide elevated views, which definitely highlight the pleasing line of identical ore jennies trailing off behind the trees. Not much happens in sands. Mostly the mosquitoes bite you in the summer and the wind howls in the winter. Pretty much the only excitement comes in the form of CN's freight trains around milepost 164. Partridge, the run-up from Escanaba is over, and trains slow to enter yard limits. Beyond Partridge, all trains enter the Lake Superior-Ishpeming Railroad, which maintains joint trackage with the CN down to the Empire Mine, as well as northwestward towards Ishpeming. After securing permission from the LS&I operator to do so, the Jennies make a leftward turn at Partridge Junction, leading them onto the south leg of the Y formed between Partridge, Palmer Line, and Empire Junctions. This particular U-743 would have to hold up at Empire Junction for the LS&I's 3 Tilden job. Led by the last remaining pair of U-30Cs on the GE-dominated road, the 3 Tilden job is working hard upgrade from the mines towards Eagle Mills with 60 loaded ore jennies heading for the dock in Marquette. With the LS&I out of the way, the operator gave U-743 permission down to the Empire Mine on a line which threads between mountains of overburden left over from nearly 60 years of continuous mining at Empire. These photos were taken a number of years ago from the cab of an Orgeni train by a now retired engineer, giving a look at how the operations looked from the inside. First up is looking south at Empire Junction, again towards the formidable overburden piles. In this area, the gradient to the mines was treacherous, especially in wintertime. Thus, the existing main line is actually a later construction, with the original alignment now buried for most of its length. Next up are the two culvert tunnels, which carry the overburden haul roads over the railroad. Upon exiting the second one, the train arrives at the mine itself with the vast pit to the right. Upon entering the mine's loadout yard, the stacking conveyor dominates the horizon. Beneath this conveyor, colossal piles of ore would build up awaiting shipment. The covered hoppers are full of bentonite clay, used as a binder in the formation of the flux iron ore pellets. The Empire mines specialized in their so-called viceroy product, a special flux pellet made specifically for the mill at Indiana Harbor. Still more mine buildings and machinery dot the landscape. It never was a simple or small undertaking to produce this much iron ore. From above, it seems even more large and impressive. Constructed in the early 1960s and expanded numerous times over the years, the Empire Mine features a pit covering several square miles and plunging 1,200 feet below the original surface elevation to the lowest point in the state of Michigan. The stuff they mined here was a magnetite formation of the Marquette Iron Range, rocks with about 30% iron content as they come out of the hole. At the pellet plant, the ore was crushed into a fine powder and separated using magnets before being mixed with limestone in that clay binder. The mixture was then rolled and fired into trillions of little iron ore pellets, which are about 65% iron, ready to be fed into blast furnaces at steel mills around the lakes. By the time we flew the drone over the complex in the fall, it had been 5 weeks since the last pellet was produced, and workers were wrapping up operations to place the complex into an indefinite idle state. All the iron ore left to move is what was sitting on the ground, as the U-743 worked to break the train into 2 segments for loading by a front-end loader, as the mammoth Super Pocket Tipple was placed out of service along with the mine. Just a few weeks later, in mid-October, the trains of Canadian National would cease to call the mine entirely, with only a small pile of ore remaining as insurance for the blast furnaces of Chicago, as Cliffs, the owner of the mine, shifted production of the specialized pellet type to a different mine in Minnesota. Once loading was complete, the trains would be routed back onto the LS&I main line for the run back to Partridge. The scale of the culvert tunnels becomes apparent when one of the house-sized dump trucks rolls overhead, capable of moving many tons at a time around the mine site. Beyond the tunnel, the downhill descent, even on the realignment, is obvious and a daily challenge for crews on the heavy ore trains. Back out at Partridge, freshly loaded trains are just clearing the yard limits as they pass under M35. The newer GE ES44DC and a much older C40-8M full cowl unit begin to throttle up to attain track speed, setting off on the return run to Escanaba. About 20 minutes out of Partridge, we're back on the bridge to K.I. Sawyer. Back at Little Lake, the two General Electric Evolution Series units are leading the way. These were, along with pretty much all other 6-axle power on the CN, the power that pulled these trains up to the very end. Indeed, it wasn't uncommon to see full cowl locomotives mixing in with the more modern equipment. Back in the day when this was CNW territory, common power included Fairbanks Morris Trainmasters, which crews loved for their pulling power. And of course later, the Wisconsin Central SD45s would power these trains up and down the main line. Back at the M35 crossing, two motorcyclists play it safe and pause for the 9,900-ton train to roll on through. At Lathrop, a short yet heavy train jostles around the camera as the identical ore jennies make for an earthworm-like machine. The hamlet of Rock was hopping this afternoon, with the railroad even under slow order as they cut through the end of Summer Festival. On the curve at Brampton, the defect detector will deliver its message after the train passes, revealing the train's direction, speed, as well as the ambient temperature. Note that while the speed limit for the subdivision is 40 miles an hour, loaded ore journeys were limited to just 30.
Detector, mile 127.5. Southbound, no defects. Temperature 72F. Total axles 416. Speed 29. Detector out.
Here's a look at the north end of the Brampton Passing siding, which is essentially the front yard for this household. At the Escanaba River, the oar's time riding the rails is just about over. This bridge was, until recently, a neat old through truss structure, but time finally caught up to it and the spans were replaced with contemporary, practical deck spans a few years ago. just weeks left in the railroad operations at the Escanaba ore yard, we flew the drone overhead. This complex was large but fairly simple. A series of tracks to store ore jennies, both loaded and empty, an unloading house, and 2 long ore storage piles, and the dock. The unloading house, seen here in this old photo, has 2 tracks, one for bottom dumping and another for rotary dump operations. In either case, the ore was transported to the ore storage area and eventually to the dock by a series of conveyors. The dock at this facility is not original to the site, and unlike other ore docks on the lakes, it used a conveyor crane system, not gravity pockets, to load the ore boats. Departing with one of the last loads is a Joseph L. Block, bound for Indiana Harbor. On the 18th of April 2017, the last ore pellets were scraped off the ground and loaded into the Wilfrid Sykes, closing out a 165-year tradition in Escanaba. Canadian National would then close the docks permanently, with plans to work with the city for potential redevelopment. For many Yoopers, as people of the Upper Peninsula are often known, the closing of the Empire Mine and the closing of the Escanaba ore dock is on caliber with an amputation. These operations brought economic sustainability to the region, which now faces an ever more uncertain future. For the Iron Range, only the Tilden mine remains in a region once host to dozens of mines. For Escanaba, a city once used to the rumble of ore trains from numerous railroads, only the U-745 all-rail ore trains will continue to move through town without stopping, and the U-741 and U-743 have been retired from the railroad callboards. This has been a special presentation by the Thornapple River Rail Series. For more railroad-related content that you might find interesting, hit that subscribe button, and if you have a question or comment, leave it in the comments. Thank you for watching.